The Wilds of Patagonia, by Carl Skottsberg, published in London, by Edward Arnold, year 1911. Part 2, Chapter 5, The Patagonian Channels. The scheme proposed for the next excursion was a cruise in the Patagonian channels between the Magellan Straits and the Penis Gulf, during which we wanted to pay more particular attention to the natives. As Halley could expect little if any result from a trip in these parts, it was resolved that he should take up his work elsewhere and meet us in Ancud, on Chiloé, in the beginning of July. On May 9 he departed for Rio Grande, in Tierra del Fuego, whence he brought back fine collections of tertiary fossils. After his return to Punta Arenas he traveled on horseback along the Brunswick Peninsula to the place where Darwin long ago collected the first specimens of Magellan fossils. Our expedition, however, got another member. On several occasions I had discussed the Channel trip with one of our new friends, Captain José Bordes, piloto mayor in the Chilean Navy, and intimately acquainted with those parts and their population. He very much wanted to go with us, but could not, of course, simply leave his service, and he proposed that I should ask permission for him from the senior in command of the Navy, Vice Admiral Montt, in Valparaiso. The latter readily granted my request, and Bordes got a telegraphic order to take part in the expedition. But at first it seemed difficult to get a suitable vessel. Admiral Rojas declared with a smile that the expedition had already accounted for one ship, viz. the Hummel, and besides she would have been too small and uncomfortable for an extended journey. Of the two other vessels stationed at Punta Arenas, one was of no use to us, but the other, the Meteoro, a twin-screw steamer of 650 tons, very well fulfilled our requirements. Unfortunately, she was bound for a run to San Felix Lighthouse, taking with her an engineer, sent by the government to effect the preparatory work for the proposed Marconi installation between Valparaiso and Punta Arenas. All telegrams between the Magellan territories and the rest of Chile have to pass Argentina, an ordinary overland wire being an impossibility and a submarine cable being considered too expensive. After her return to Punta Arenas, the Meteoro had to visit the Evangelistas lighthouse, and thus it would be a long time before she could be at our disposal. Through the kindness of the authorities the difficulties were surmounted. I proposed that we should take part of the expedition to the Evangelistas rocks, and from there proceed directly to the channels, and the admiral assented. This was rather an advantage, for we won another station which we had never hoped for. Still one small difficulty remained. We wanted to get an interpreter, a Spanish-speaking Indian, but could not get one in Punta Arenas. We had to put off this quest, and Bordes told us he would try to persuade one or other of his Indian acquaintances in the Straits to come with us. On May 21 we left the sunshine behind and once more disappeared in the rainy west. We anchored in Port Gallant, where Indians used to pass, selling their otter skins to an Austrian, who lives there, and has done so for many years, with a native woman. Few Indians were there now, but amongst them was a middle-aged woman, who knew Bordes very well and had great confidence in him. At first she had strong apprehensions about coming with us, and it required all Bordes' eloquence to persuade her to take the decisive step on to the deck of the Meteoro. I now have the honor of introducing to my reader Mrs. Akichakwarwil T, thus she calls herself. Her mission name, Amelia, is more handy, though not so euphonious. She became quite an indispensable assistant. She persuaded her countrymen to come on board, explaining that the instruments were not to torture them with, that we were no Cristianos malos, evil Christians, which words are inseparably associated in the mouth of a Channel Indian. Every evening I sat with her in the laboratory, she always crouching on one of the plant presses, trying to teach me a little of her marvelous language, compared with which both Irish and Scotch appear quite civilized tongues. Unfortunately, her knowledge of Spanish was too superficial for grammatical studies, and I had to be very patient to make her understand. A great drawback was that in Spanish she always spoke of herself in the third person, as children often do. It was funny enough to study her in her new surroundings. She came on board dressed in some queer rags and with naked legs, and we could not help laughing when she walked about like a fine lady in a gray gown trimmed with red velvet, and a green cape, over which her black hair fell thick and wild. And in this dress she became a member of the Swedish Magellan expedition. At first she did not seem very pleased with her new life, walked alone, silent, and almost ill-humored, but we soon gained her confidence, and she gradually became more communicative. One night when, as usual, we were sitting up talking I wormed some of her story out of her. She had been caught by the missionaries and was brought to Dawson Island with her husband and children. She had 3 of them, one so big, and the third so. She measured with her hand above the deck, and she was such a nice little girl, she added. But they lived in a bad house, all fell ill and died, and she was left alone. How she managed to get away from Dawson Island I do not know, anyhow I congratulated her. She did not want to go back. The Meteoro heads west, more and more barren grows the landscape, more and more dwarfed the forest, colder the storm and fog. We have left the continuous coast and steamed through the archipelago. Home, sweet home, hundreds and thousands of islands, skerries, rocks, with a cluster of stunted trees on the lee side, smooth rocks with some grass where only seabirds breed. We have left the untidy slate and have reached the granite zone, where the glacial epoch has created the same scary nature as in Sweden. The more we look, the stronger grows the likeness. We dream ourselves far away, the beaches become Scotch firs, the foreign seabirds are common eiders and gulls. We made for a harbor in the offing. With boards on board we could make short cuts not marked in the charts, through interesting passages and narrow channels not exceeding 300 feet broad, and in some places so narrow that we almost touched the fringe of giant kelp, Macrocystis, on each side, and anchored in Puerto 40 Dias, the 40 days harbor, a name that holds a story. Here a vessel is said to have waited 40 days before it could approach the Evangelistas rocks. This perhaps is somewhat exaggerated, I dare not dispute it. Anyhow, a week's waiting is not a rare occurrence. For us it was of the utmost importance to land on the rock without delay, otherwise the whole voyage through the channels might be a failure. No wonder that we watched the daybreak on May 26th with great anxiety. We had enjoyed light breezes from north and east, rare but all the more welcome for that, and calculated that subsequently the regular westerly swell, nothing less than the whole Pacific Ocean, would have died down enough to make landing possible. Rain in a gray, thick sky and a water-like lead met us as we swung out through the last skerries and made for some black spots on the horizon. These are the famous Evangelistas rocks. Through the glasses the lighthouse can be seen. The motion of the sea is comparatively gentle, and the occasion seems to be favorable. However, it is no child's play to land there. We passed the black Pan de Azucar, Sugarloaf, and the Meteoro anchors in deep water between two high, black slate rocks, one of them crowned by a small lighthouse. We went with the first boat, steered by the steady hands of the boatswain over the soft switchback of swell towards the point of the rock that is honored by the name of landing place. Were it not for the name nobody would suspect it. The sea does not break there, but only plays with the boat. One moment we are lifted high up, the gunwale scratching the rock, the next the retiring wave bears the boat back deep down among the giant kelp masses, now for a second laid bare like innumerable slimy serpents, that the capricious surf winds into graceful patterns. 8 above our head rises a rough slate wall about 30 or 40 feet high, and some men stand on the top of it, waving their hands. Presumably they are glad to see us. A rope hangs down in a long loop, by which means the boat is kept in place, and we are told to use it as we climb. Boards is the first to try, old and used to it as he is. The main thing is to mind one's P's and Q's. When a wave lifts the boat up to the cliff one must jump, without losing a second, onto a shelf 2 or 3 inches wide, slippery with green algae. Without the rope one could hardly keep one's footing. If you do not want the next wave to attack you in the rear you had better look lively, climbing and crawling with the assistance of projections and the rope. Finally you are on safe ground and have gone on shore, on Evangelistas. We had but one adventure. A young officer got a cold bath when he jumped, that was all. The 3 lighthouse keepers gave us a hearty welcome. No wonder. A worse prison than theirs it is difficult to conceive. Even on a short visit like ours one feels a certain oppression, as of a prisoner behind a curtain waved by storm and rain. A high, for the most part quite barren, rock, steep on all sides. The vegetation a swampy moss peat, giving way to the pressure of your feet. A small lighthouse, trembling in the frightful gales which give these parts of the world their bad reputation. Day after day drowned in floods of rain mingled with the sprinkle of the breakers. Many miles from the nearest shore, hundreds from civilization, from which a message is sent some few times every year, when always with difficulties and often with dangers, provisions are landed. That is what life on Evangelistas is like. I should not advise anybody with a melancholy turn of mind to settle there. It was interesting to find the slates again so far west. On very few places do they appear outside the granite zone. We had soon collected specimens of the poor, miserable, and scanty plants and animals, but it was long before all the stores had been landed. They were hoisted up with a derrick, worked by hand, and consequently so slow that people prefer the more hazardous ascent on their hands and knees. It is curious to think how the iron supports, not to speak of all the materials for the lighthouse, were ever landed. The story of the lighthouse would be worth a special chapter. Sitting on a bag, we allowed ourselves to be lowered by the tiny wire down into the boat, that with great care was kept beneath us, 60 feet below. A quick as well as a comfortable manner of getting away from the island. On board, the captain was more anxious than ever. The winter days are short, the mist was not far off, and we must reach 40 Dias before nightfall. When at 3 p.m. we weighed anchor, the fog was already so dense that the islands were lost to sight within a few minutes. The water here in the offing is very dirty. We tried to make Cape King, but the current played us a trick, and suddenly some nasty black needles loomed out of the thick veil on the port side. We were amidst the reefs, within the danger line. The course was changed, boards was persistent, and we tried again, but night came on, and we were forced to spend it running to and fro in the entrance of the Magellan Straits, guided by the flashes from the wee lighthouse, that has saved more than one vessel from making nearer acquaintance with the ill-famed Cape Pillar. The next day we could start our work in the Queen Adelaide group, where many detailed geographical observations are still waiting to be made. We visited Pacheco Island and went out by Anita Channel, just at the most difficult spot, when a fog, so thick and white that we could not see the rocks close at hand, descended over the water. Of course there is no danger of collision, nevertheless it caused some anxiety among the officers. The fog vanished as quickly as it had come, and we proceeded to VIII Channel, where for the first time we met the Indians in their natural state. They were very shy, and refused to come on board. We continued east, crossed Smith Channel, and anchored in a harbor called Puerto Ramirez, on the Muñoz Gamero Peninsula, the only spot inhabited by white men between the Straits and the Gulf of Penis. Several years ago, when Chile and Argentina were at odds with each other, the former country made a coaling station here, and some sheds with coal are still left, guarded by 2 watchmen. Later on we had good reason to bless this coal store. By the last day of May we were again underway, steaming northward through the channels. Few places in Patagonia are so famous as these channels, where the steamer plunges between black, steep walls, crowned by snowy peaks reflected in the usually smooth water, where the open sea is never sighted, where one need not be afraid of storm or fog, when one has only to seek one of the numerous, charming little harbors. One can travel from 53 degrees to 48 degrees, a distance of 5 degrees, without seeing the ocean. Where in the world is there anything like it? What a pity that sunshine and a clear sky are of rare occurrence. For days and weeks the rain does not cease, and a cold, wet fog rests over the water. The channels have been compared with the Norwegian fjords. As far as the numerous inlets running east from the channels into the mountains are concerned, I think that this comparison is obvious, even if we treat them from a geographical point of view. But in the outer appearance there is a big difference. In Patagonia death seems to reign. The channels are so silent. Most of the seabirds, such as gulls, cape pigeons, albatrosses, and others that give life to the picture in the open sea have disappeared. So have the porpoises which play merrily round the bows. Only some kelp geese, ducks, or potto vapors are still to be seen. But the forest is magnificent, in spite of the utter silence prevailing there. My work took me there every day, and every night I returned on board with a fresh stock of experience and collections. Sometimes the beach, naturally always the evergreen one, leaves room for yellow and reddish swamps, where the only needle tree of South Patagonia, Libocedrus tetragona, grows. People here call it the cypress. Large ferns with arborous growth, Blechinum magellanicum, are noteworthy. As usual, flowers are rare, but there is one, the southern Copahu, Phyllesia buxifolia, which flowers also during midwinter, that with its large pink bells is almost unrivaled. To one thing the botanist has to accustom himself, to return every day as soaked as is the forest itself. In the Sarmiento Channel, the continuation of Smith Channel, we met several Indians. 2 canoes with their crews we took on board and brought to Puerto Bueno, where we stayed 2 days. Between Chatham and Hanover Islands, in a narrow place called Guia Narrows, we met another canoe. A naked girl angrily repeated, "Cristiano Malo," and the crew could not be persuaded to come on board. Probably they had been badly treated by some passing sailors. The traffic in the channels is very small nowadays. Almost all ships prefer to take the open sea, where they may steam day and night, which is hardly possible in the channels, but one of the greatest pleasures on a cruise round South America is lost thereby. At about 51 degrees we noticed a certain change in the vegetation. New trees and bushes appeared, especially a curious needle tree called manio, in this case Podocarpus nubigena, and beautiful climbing plants covered the trunks. When passing in Ascenta's channel, one comes out into more open water, but only for a very short distance. Soon the high walls close in on both sides again. Penguin Inlet was full of ice, and in Icy Reach we met innumerable small ice floes, probably from Air Inlet, one of the unknown inlets on this coast. Not far from there, in Port Grappler, we came across the largest party of Indians we saw. They had probably had disagreeable experiences with white people. It is not uncommon for unscrupulous people to try to obtain their only valuable possession, the otter skins, without giving them anything useful in return. They sometimes ill-treat them, seduce their women, or rob them of their children. But thanks to the energetic efforts of Amelia, we got on rather friendly terms with them, giving them what we had of spare clothes, biscuits, tobacco, knives, matches, and other things highly appreciated by them. On June 7th, we reached the English Narrows, a very narrow, S-shaped passage, where more than one vessel has struck. The masts of one were still to be seen. In the 80s, a German expedition tried to find another passage. At that time, the Cosmos steamers used to frequent the channels, and discovered quite a system of channels west of the main track, but unfortunately they are interrupted by a place much worse still, where the open sea rolls in, and which is so shallow that breakers are often experienced, and one may have to wait several days for a chance of crossing. We intended to run this way on our return. Now we proceeded further along the Messier Channel, and thus reached our destination, the Gulf of Penis. Towards the east, a large system of inlets, Baker Inlet with its branches, penetrating far into the mountains, opened, and there we turned in. For several days we had discussed the coal question, and as the captain argued that we should be unable to reach Punta Arenas, we gave up the idea of going to the mouth of Rio Baker, with the greater regret as we were not far from it. In terrible squalls we passed Troya Channel and turned westward, when we suddenly caught sight of a sailing boat. We guessed it to be people from the Baker Company, a Chilean enterprise, which has the leasehold of large stretches round the river from the inlet to the Argentina frontier. Of course we stopped at once, took the crew on board, and towed their boat to a harbor. Baker Inlet is a very wild-looking place. In consequence of its west-easterly direction, the gales rush through it with unrestrained force, and the forest has been driven back into sheltered places, where the company has cut down the big trees. In the coves one can find scenery of charming beauty, where the slopes with woods, cascades, and snow patches are reflected in the smooth, icy green water. When one enters such a cove, coming from the windy barrenness of the channel, one gets the same feeling as coming into a warm, comfortable room from the snowstorm outside. As we very much wanted to visit some of the channels outside the Wellington Islands, we crossed Messier Channel on June 12th and passed into Albatross Channel. Here every name on the chart indicates that it was given by sons of Das Gross Vaterland. The weather was terrible, and we walked about wet and cold all day long, but otherwise contented, as every day brought new features under our observation. On account of the poor store of coal, we had to abandon our plan of going round Wellington Islands, but followed Fallows Channel only to the mouth of Adelbert Channel, through which we came to the Messier again. Again we passed the Narrows and took the shortest road through Chasm Reach, where the echo plays at ball between precipitous walls with the sound waves from our whistle. One must not forget to look astern before the steamer changes its course, for high up the ice-clad summits on Wellington Island may be seen for a moment. Still, we had an important item of our program left, the survey of Peel Inlet, and as I strongly insisted on it, the captain had to yield, and promised to take some tons of coal on board in Muñoz Gamero, which he had refused to do before. But the probable reason was that he was in dread of every place not completely known, and walked about always suspecting danger. Had we not had Boards with us, who was the real commander as soon as it was a question of some difficult enterprise, it is more than uncertain whether we should have been able to do much work. Certainly I could not force the commander to do anything he declared dangerous to the safety of the vessel he was in charge of, and as, unlike most naval officers, he did not take the slightest interest in scientific work, he took refuge behind his responsibility as often as he could. Through Andrews Sound we went towards Pitt Channel. No harbor is known here, and on the chart one anchorage is marked, in 11 fathoms of water at the most easterly of the Kentish Islands. In vain we looked for that anchorage, it was deep all round, and in spite of the approaching darkness we had to continue our course. We sounded close to the shore, 60, 40, 30 fathoms. At last we anchored in 19 fathoms, but then the distance to the rocks was only 100 feet. We were completely without shelter, the anchorage was bad, and a squall would result in our dragging our anchors. Before daybreak we weighed and steamed through Pitt Channel into Peel Inlet. The Huemul, which was here once, had indicated a sandbank on the place where the inlet branches. We passed with plenty of water. As we slowly glided into Peel Inlet and the last hiding point lay behind us, we became silent, struck dumb by the scenery. Perhaps we never saw any more grand. It was quite wonderful. Furthest off, but nevertheless not very far, rise the high crests of the Andes, with fantastic needles and sharp-cut peaks, round which the continuous sheet of inland ice has folded its dazzling mantle. 4 broad streams of ice emerge from it, embracing the violet-brown Nunatics and joining in a gigantic glacier with a front nearly 2 miles broad, one single expanse of blue crevices and white crests. This all in a frame of evergreen forest and reflected in transparent, glossy water where the image now and then is blotted out by the ice flows driven to and fro by the currents. Inland ice, Alps with eternal snow, all the details of a glacier, slopes and shores clad with a primeval forest, the crystalline fjord water, the drifting ice, and all this embraced in one single glance. That is wonderful, I think. We could the more enjoy the sight as we had discovered an unknown harbor not far off, suitable in every way. Quenzel and I pulled through the ice, densely packed in certain places, to the glacier, and the officers started to make a map of the harbor, which we named Puerto Tempanos, i.e., the port of ice flows, as owing to the tide the cove is filled with small pieces of ice twice a day. We found ourselves in a world of ice, moraines, and muddy rivers, where we got on capitally, and did not return before dark, very pleased with the results, which included, amongst others, important observations of the geology in the high Cordillera. The next day broke calm and fine, but with a fog so thick that we could not see even the shore of our little cove. In the afternoon work could be continued round the harbor, which is fringed by a swampy forest of deciduous beech, Nothofagus antarctica. Fortunately we got another clear day. The last thing we did was to erect a tablet at the entrance of the harbor, with this inscription, Meteoro. Commission Sueco Chilena, 16, v. 1908. I suppose it will be long before anybody finds it. As we came out, the old channel weather met us again with rain and a gale of wind, but what did it matter? We had been successful with Peel Inlet and our spirits were high. Silence now reigned in Puerto Bueno. The huts stood empty like grinning skeletons, their inhabitants gone on their everlasting wanderings. Further south we came across some more families, and the last were seen at Muñoz Gamero, where we made a short stay to take fresh supplies of coal on board. In Smith Channel we met 2 steamers, one of them evoking great excitement, the Norwegian ship Om, chartered by a Punta Arenas firm to run between this place and Valparaiso. Halley was on board on his way to Chiloé, and we waved a farewell to each other. Fresh wind and a heavy sea, Cape pigeons and stormy petrels met us when we came out into the straits. Behind us lay the labyrinth, the wonderland where we should never return. We had some places left to visit before we could consider the excursion finished. The lighthouse on Felix Island we visited on our way out, but stopped once more to bring the mail to Punta Arenas. From there we went to Woodsworth Bay to find a harbor. This place has been famous for its waterfall ever since the time of the Beagle. There is no lack of waterfalls in the channels, as the rivers have no other resource but to flow vertically, but this was beyond all we had seen. Dancing from one narrow shelf to the next, from a height of nearly 1,000 feet, the water hurls itself into the sea, and the whole length of the jet is visible at one time. In Port Gallant we said goodbye to Amelia. I dare say she left us under the impression that not all Cristianos are Malos. On a midwinter night the Meteoro anchored in the roads of Punta Arenas. We had no time to spare there. On the 29th we went on board a Cosmos steamer that took us to Corral, and there we immediately found another vessel bound for Ancud, the capital of Chiloé. Chapter 6. A dying race. A keen wind whistles through the channels, tears the stunted trees, and now and then flings a gray shower as a contribution to the yellowish bogs. On the tops of the mountains the winter snow shines against a leaden sky. Then Amelia presses her flat nose still flatter against the panes in the laboratory and says something which signifies canoe. By means of the glasses we perceive a black spot far ahead. Our first encounter with the Indians is at hand. Darwin once said that a naked savage in his own land is a sight never to be forgotten. It was not the first we had seen, but the impression was never so strong. The canoe we now met was typical from every point of view. Half naked, wild-looking figures are pulling out of time, in the stern an old woman steers. Everywhere amongst the queer luggage, sticks and poles of various shapes, old sealskins, piles of shells, and pieces of blubber. Barking dogs peep forth, and in the smoke from the fire, always nursed in the middle of the boat, some rough-headed children appear. Now they have caught sight of Amelia, With their dark eyes wide open, they quickly exchange ideas about this elegant lady who steps about on deck with such an assurance of demeanor. She was sent to negotiate. We were under the impression that a whole sermon would be necessary to explain that we were not bad and did not want to rob them of their children. At least a long while elapsed before they could make up their minds to come on board. Not until now did we get an idea of the contents of a canoe. Out came a dozen persons, men, women, and children, the youngest carried on the back, accompanied by half a score of dogs. They look round shyly, but at the same time with much curiosity. Some of them come on board after a certain hesitation. They refuse to leave their canoe alone, but one of them stops to keep an eye on us. Certainly we are likely to steal the valuable contents. Only think of the delicious half-rotten whale blubber. Let us make nearer acquaintance with this peculiar race. Round the funnel, where it is warm, our guests have made themselves comfortable, squatting on their hams. Truly it is a funny assembly, and one is almost ready to ask if they really belong to the same species as we do. The face is round, the distance between the cheekbones being remarkably great. The eyes have a dark and earnest expression, the nose is flat and broad, the mouth often monstrously large, with thick lips. The teeth of the younger members are white and beautiful. In the case of the older members, one often finds the front teeth missing. They have gone in the process of one or other of the employments to which they have been put. The skin is of a dirty yellowish-brown color, sometimes with a coppery tinge. The hair is very thick, coarse, and jet black. It is worn hanging loose over the shoulders, a square-cut fringe hiding the forehead. Both sexes show a remarkable disproportion between the upper body and the legs. The trunk is well developed, the neck short and thick, the shoulders straight, and the arms long and muscular. Often one finds real features of beauty, though the body is often disfigured by an all too prominent abdomen. Their worst point is thin, bent legs. Want of exercise retards their development. The Indian lives in his canoe and by his fire. He is always sitting, and when he straightens his legs the skin folds over the kneecap. The men, who are generally without any trace of a beard, are mostly of finer stature than the women. They are considerably taller, their medium height reaching 5 feet 1 inch, against 4 feet 8 inches in the case of the women. The babies are rather lovely, with skin and hair of a lighter color and with eyes of that deep blue which is often observed in kittens. A visit to the camp gives us the best idea of Indian life. The beach is covered with shells. The canoes have been hauled up on thin logs. A few steps from the water, and we reach the huts, that harmonize so with the surrounding forest that one does not see them until one gets close. The forest gives shelter from at least one direction. On the rocks mussels grow large and fat, and outside in the cove one can gather sea urchins. The inhabitants have gathered in front of their wigwams to greet us. They were just at table, an occupation much in favor during the daytime, or even at night. They have hastened to put on old garments, such as shawls, pieces of blankets, torn jerseys, and or even the original mantle of skins. This was once the only garment worn, a square mantle of fur seal or sea otter, sometimes completed by a fig leaf of the same material, kept in place by strings made from sinews. The head was always uncovered. With the visits of white men, modern clothes have become more or less common, but there is hardly an Indian possessing a complete suit. One has a coat, another a pair of trousers. Most of them have the legs quite naked. Some wear ornaments, necklaces of shells, or on the breast a flat, polished piece of bone, fixed on a neatly plaited string. Without protests they let us enter the hut, some flexible sticks in a circle, bent together and fixed with a tough, grass-like plant, Marcipaspermum grandiflorum. Hardly is the Indian able to stand upright under his roof, where the smoke from the fire, which is fed with fresh green branches of evergreen beech, may seek its way out at leisure. The wigwam is covered with grass, fern leaves, twigs of trees, or with sea lion skins and old pieces of clothes, all according to circumstances. The large skins are naturally much appreciated. They are never left behind on a camping place, as are all the other materials used. The hut has one great advantage: it is easily constructed, and that is the main thing for a nomadic tribe. Once or twice we saw the skeleton of a hut brought along, which of course saved trouble. We gladly took a seat with them and accepted their food. They have nice things to offer: large shellfish of various kinds, raw or roasted on the cinders, just as you like. Conversation is kept up with the aid of Amelia as interpreter. She is in her element, and appears to have forgotten all her new civilization, ready to jump in a canoe again with naked legs amongst dogs, dirt, and rubbish. The shells crackle, lips whisper. The natives have a phenomenal capacity for speaking without producing a sound. They look very earnest, their lips move quickly, nothing is heard. Suddenly the whole party starts to laugh heartily. It is evident that somebody has made a sally, and there is no doubt that we are the butt of their joke. Mussels form the main part of their food. The big common mytilus are simply plucked like fruit at low tide. The flat patella is loosened with a short stick flattened like a chisel at one end. Sea urchins are caught with a long stick, cleft in 4 parts at the end. But besides this they eat fish, meat, and blubber, or almost anything they can get hold of. Their weapons are very simple. The most important are the harpoons of bone, with one hook or with a long row of hooks like a saw fixed in a handle. There seems to be plenty of otter in the channels. The skin is fine and valuable, and is the only object of barter available. Seal is not to be got every day, but one can live well on a big sea lion for several days. And what delight when they come across a stranded whale! Feasts are held as long as anything eatable is left. From all directions the savages hasten up, eat till they are fit to burst, and pull away with loaded canoes. Several of the Indians we met had big quantities of whale blubber. This does not contradict the fact that the Indian only lives for the day and never thinks of saving anything. He leads a wild life, with meat and blubber one day and nothing the next. Bows and arrows seem to have fallen out of use, which is the more remarkable as nothing has replaced them. They are of the same shape as those used by the ONAs, but smaller. The arrows are made of yellow berberis wood, and have a neatly fashioned point of flint or glass. The quiver is of seal or otter skin. Slings are sometimes used to kill birds with, and the women are said to be clever in using them. Another weapon also is found, but we made its acquaintance only once. It was in Port Grappler. The natives had been on board, and had not shown themselves amiably disposed towards us. The next day we went on shore to see their camp. As we were on our way we saw the women and children hurry away from the huts along a narrow path that disappeared in the thick forest. Such a retreat seems to have been constructed at every camping place, and the men gathered in front of the houses threatening us with stones, sticks, and a kind of club, which at once awoke our curiosity. They would not allow us to land before we had promised them to leave a shotgun we brought behind in the yawl. Amelia had hard work to persuade them. At the same moment the clubs disappeared. In vain we asked them, in vain we looked all round. They only shook their heads, probably suspecting that we should deprive them of their arms and then assault them. It was only after a long parley and rich presents of biscuits and tobacco that one of them disappeared behind the hut and returned with a club, which he gave us. In comparison with its length, 2 feet, it is very heavy, and is made from the root of the tepu, Tepualia stipularis. The Channel Indians live in families and have no idea of a community. Now and then some families keep together, probably those related to each other, as, for instance, 2 brothers with their wives and children. The largest party we saw, in Port Grappler, numbered 30 members, who listened to an old gray-haired rascal, whose objection to our anthropometrical instruments made him prohibit his subjects from visiting our laboratory. But, as we later found out, the different families here afterwards spread in various directions. As a rule, the canoe Indian has only one wife, but it may happen that a man with an old, how soon, and ugly wife secures a younger one. Polygamy is connected with the position of the woman. She is subject to her husband's will, she does the hard work. Hour after hour, with her baby on her back, she sits pulling the boat in a tiring position. Half a day she wades in the ice-cold water to fill the baskets with mussels. The household furniture is very plain. Knives made from shells or stones, sinews, bone prickers, all kept in round wooden boxes, and baskets plated with a certain skill. How hard must it be in the circumstances to give birth to the children, rear them, and teach them to struggle for life with resources smaller, perhaps, than any other people on the earth possess. We seldom saw more than 2 or 3 children in a family. It is evident that mortality must be great among these naked little beings, who are dragged about with their parents in any kind of weather. Here, if ever one may study the survival of the fittest, he who stands the test when young should be able to stand anything. I do not think they ever reach any great age. The only one that looked more than 50 was the above-mentioned cacique in Port Grappler. They have no idea whatever of their age. They do not count more than to 3. Any number above is much or many. We need not be astonished that they're not getting old. In fact, they lead a life as hard as we can conceive. An existence in constant cold, in eternal rain, which makes it impossible to dry anything for weeks together, in icy water, in storms and frequent dangers, and, finally, the intercourse with white men, is not favorable to longevity. That the dismal surroundings and the frightful struggle for existence should put their stamp on the mental life is easily understood. There rests a certain mournful melancholy over their souls. They are used to fearing the dangerous elements, and white men, more dangerous still. But, as true children of instinct, they forget all sorrows round the crackling fire. When they have plenty to eat, their eyes sparkle, they have a merry time. Play seems to be foreign to them. Not even the children play, but look earnest as old people, as if they could already behold all the terrors of the future in the dreary sky that lifts its vault above their land. I have not seen any ceremonies. Probably they perform some, but refuse to before strangers. The Yugin tribe was not without them. They have no religious ideas, they do not worship anything, but it is clear that they must fear powers of nature, which they cannot explain. They also seem to have some sort of idea that dead persons may hurt them. Twice we saw natives carrying a small leather pouch with hair from a dead person, and Amelia declared them to be amulets. Anyhow, their owners parted with them for a matchbox. Life makes the Channel Indian a nomad. He moves along the shores all his life, year after year, from birth to death. However plain his canoe may look, it is a masterpiece, if we take into consideration that it is made with empty hands. Formerly the principal tool was the fire. A tree was burnt at the foot till it crashed down, the log was literally burnt down to a plank, and the charred wood gradually scraped off with big sharp-edged shells or stone knives. Now axes are used, but not every family has one. Then the plank is furnished with holes along the edges, as the canoe must be bound together. The construction is simple. One bottom board bent upwards in the bow and stern to form the broad stem and the stern post, which protrude above the sides, made of two boards fixed to each other and to the bottom. They are drawn together with the tough bast of the cypress or the stem of a runner plant, Campsidium chilense, and tightened with moss, fat, and sea. Nevertheless, the canoe makes a lot of water, and the scoop of sealskin is frequently needed. Some small sticks across the gunwales make the thwarts, and it is ready, the treasure, the family fortune. Now and then we saw oars of the primitive type, made in two pieces with the blade fixed with bast onto the handle, but those who are well off and possess a hatchet make them as we do. The oar to steer with is shorter than the rest, and is handled with great ability by the women. Often they travel into the open water, and the sea inside the channels may become heavy indeed for such a primitive craft, especially when, during a move from one camp to another, it is heavily loaded. Once we took 2 canoes on board, and the contents were emptied on the deck. In spite of the dreadful stench, Quenzel and I made a list of the things contained in one of them. 3 long oars, 1 short, handles for the harpoons, hatchet, modern, basket of bark for fresh water, 2 boxes with harpoon points, necklaces, sinews, prickers, and 3 small bags of sealskin with the same contents as the boxes, a bag of whale hide with blubber, baskets, baler of sealskin, a piece of slate to sharpen knives, bundles of bast, sea lion skins, heaps of shells, pieces of blubber, various whalebones and baleines, bundles of marsupispermum and a painter, plated of that same plant. Nowadays the Channel Indians are distributed from the Magellan Straits to the Gulf of Penis, over a distance of 6 degrees. Generally they keep inside, but sometimes travel out in the opening, and are said to use larger canoes for such journeys. We did not see any of this larger kind, but in Port Gallant found a third construction made from a single log. That sort is a product of late years. To the east the natives once traveled as far as Useless Bay and Magdalena Channel. Opposite our camping place in Admiralty Inlet we found the old huts. They are often seen in Last Hope Inlet, and sometimes in Skyring Water. As I have told above, we had heard of a road made by the natives from Obstruction Sound to Skyring, and we spent a day during our Skyring expedition in order to visit the place. Our yawl passed the bar at the entrance of Excelsior Sound, and we soon reached its inner extremity, and seemed surrounded everywhere by a wall of rocks and green foliage. At first we looked in vain. There is no beach of sand or gravel. The water reaches the very peat and the roots of the trees, and it was a mere chance that we found the landing place, so well is it hidden. The road follows a narrow gorge, where a vault of green leaves closes above one's head. It is 400 yards long, and laid with short sticks across, with a distance of from 3 to 6 feet between them. At the other end we found a lagoon with fresh water, and from a hill we saw another lagoon separating us from Obstruction Sound. The sticks greatly facilitate the transport of the heavy canoes. What the Indians find to do in Skyring is not easy to tell. There are no shells or seals, and to judge from their old huts they carry provisions with them. Formerly they probably used to go there hunting guanacos, or more especially deer, and now perhaps to beg at the settlements. Several other passes, portage, as they are sometimes called, are known in the channels. The Yagan tribe, which inhabits Tierra del Fuego down to Cape Horn, and the remnants of which are collected on a small mission station, leads a life in every way corresponding to that of the Channel tribe. Their canoe, however, is of a very different type. This is not remarkable. Much more so is it that their languages are entirely different, not one word being the same, or even anything similar. It was possible for me to discover this, but how explain the difference? They cannot have had any great intercourse with each other, though they must have met, as no natural boundaries separate them. In the Patagonian channels at least 2 different dialects are spoken. Amelia could not quite understand the Grappler people, but those in Smith Channel spoke exactly as she did. The language can hardly be called beautiful. In the ears of a white man it sounds like a mixture of inarticulate, hoarse, and guttural sounds. The numerous consonants piled upon each other are characteristic, the peculiar sh and ch sounds, 2 kinds of r, and the impure vowels, which it is scarcely possible to pronounce. Their vocabulary is deficient in words for abstract things, but very rich in names of natural products, such as plants, animals, and even such as are of no use. Since their acquaintance with white people they have created many new words, such as for steamer, knife, matches, and sea. We were surprised to know that they did not use the words for man and woman to indicate white people, but had made quite new names for them. Thus they have lived for thousands of years, have been born, eaten mussels, endured hardships, and died. Soon no descendants will walk in their footsteps, they will all die out. With every year their small tribe melts. Perhaps a few hundreds are now left, but soon only the fragments of canoes and skeletons of wigwams will bear witness to them. They will die, but not because they have succumbed to a stronger race, which is able to gain wealth, unknown to them, from their land. When they have disappeared their vast land will remain deserted, it offers means of life for nobody else. There we, the white men, are the weaker race. But why, then, are they condemned to extermination? Well, why did the Yagans disappear? Nobody hungered for their country, it was for the care of their souls. The mission gathered them, took them away from their huts and canoes, set them to read the catechism and knit stockings. They languished and died, and in this case the difficult problem, how the white intruder should treat the savages, was simple enough. Leave them alone. Receive those who wish it, absorb them if possible, but do not transplant them roughly to a new soil. I believe there is a scheme to collect the rest of the Channel Indians into the mission stations. Well, in this case it will only hasten the inevitable end. It is dreadful to see how the white men who passed through the channels and regarded the natives as strange animals, amusing to look at for a while, have been able to spread death and destruction among these innocent children of nature. Syphilis and phthisis especially ravage, and if we remember the influence of the first mentioned disease on the offspring, it is easy to tell the future result. The natives certainly have not the slightest idea of what a contagious disease is. Perhaps all assistance would come too late now, but if I had the power I would erect a sort of central station where the poor fellows could come for a doctor and for other help, but without giving them a chance of a parasitic life of idleness. There is a small possibility that this peculiar tribe, one of the very lowest on earth, may be saved from total extermination. But who is the man to do it? Chapter 7, Chiloé and the Gulf of Corcovado. In the year 1540, a Spanish navigator for the first time sighted the coast of Chiloé, but did not get very near the island. But though the discovery was not forgotten, it was 13 years before the famous conqueror of Chile, Pedro de Valdivia, got an opportunity of sending another expedition. He sent Ulloa, who surveyed the coast with a couple of small craft, and discovered islands, harbors, and channels. The formal conquest dates from 1558, and, among many other events, is celebrated in Ercila's famous epic, La Araucana. The peaceful inhabitants met an evil fate. Without suspecting anything, they received the intruders kindly. But the Spaniards acted as they always did. The land was divided among the more prominent leaders, and the inhabitants made slaves. The island, which was before quite flourishing, and had a very ancient culture, and the population of which differed to its advantage from the martial Araucanians of the mainland in being very peaceful, soon ran to waste under the Spanish sway. The native race got commingled with the Spanish, and consequently grew poorer and more lazy. The intruders set bad examples and led vicious lives. Only one thing made rapid progress: the Catholic Church. According to a Chilean author, there were already 36 churches on Chiloé in 1612. But the population diminished, the inhabitants fled out of the country. Chiloé became truly Spanish. During the Wars of Independence it remained faithful for a long time. It was the bulwark of the Spaniards, and only in January 1826, when the Republic was already several years old, did the last royal troops surrender. Long afterwards the inhabitants, more than half of them pure Spaniards or mestizos, remained royalists, and Darwin relates that they complained of not having a king, but a president who did not take any notice of them. They may have been right then, and still Chiloé has the reputation of being a remote corner. I heard more than one Chileno speak with disdain of the Chilotes. Remarkably enough, the education of the people, if we dare judge from the capacity to read and write, is better than in the rest of Chile, where the chances are the same. I think this speaks in favor of the poor Chilotes. Trade and industry are not maintained as they deserve to be, and the attempt to colonize with foreign peoples, Germans, Scandinavians, and others, has not yielded any results worth mentioning. I believe the pure Hulishes are easily counted now, but their language will always live in the sonorous names of many places. In some places it is still spoken. Their blood is in the veins of all Chilotes, and the type has much of the Indian in its appearance and is easily recognized. Nowhere in Chile does one find conditions so primitive or habits so simple as on Chiloé and the adjacent islands. A very beautiful landscape meets us as the steamer stands in for the glittering bay of Ancud. It is a day of bright sunshine. To our right we have the peninsula Laqui, with its virgin forests, to our left the low beach of Carelmapu, and right ahead the Chacao Channel opens its winding passage. Straight south the forest has been cleared away, a patch of light green shows up, and we discern the white houses of Ancud. As soon as we had anchored, boats swarmed round us and dark-skinned Chilotes tried to drown each other's voices, offering us their treasures of delicious oysters and silvery fishes. All of them also were ready to make away with our luggage and with us too. Several crews live by fleecing visitors who want to go on shore. We left in the steam launch belonging to the captain of the port, who had sent it to fetch us, as well as our equipment. A considerable distance separated the steamer from the jetty, the bay being very shallow. Ancud, the capital of the province, is a peculiar little town. It was founded in 1768 under the name of San Carlos de Ancud, and now numbers about 4,000 inhabitants. I have seldom seen a place so absolutely lacking in any architectural beauty. Most of the houses are low, wooden huts without a trace of style. The streets are rough and dirty, but fortunately not of the ordinary South American town plan. The chessboard, and crooked streets and small hills make a picturesque view. Round the harbor life is rather lively when the steamer is in. There are the business blocks, the small, ill-kept market hall, the custom house, the port master's quarters, and see. The place is crowded with bare-legged Chilotes on horseback or on foot, not without the inevitable poncho, sometimes bright and new, of a striped pattern, sometimes like a worn-out rag on which generations have rubbed their feet. Further up in the town the streets are often empty, and on the outskirts swarm pigs, fowl, cats, and dogs, which seem to flourish in the luxuriant grass. Above I said something of the general education of the Chilotes. Ancud has several schools, some of them private ones, and can boast of a lyceum. Its rector and professors showed us great kindness and hospitality. They try to be as up-to-date in their teaching as possible, but high above all their endeavors the cathedral rises with mighty proportions commanding the whole community. It is not quite finished yet, the tower is wanting, and will cost much money. I dare say it is absurd to erect a church here, and not the only one, big enough to hold the faithful in several towns of the size of Ancud. But the Catholic Church, led by an energetic bishop, is rich and powerful. There is a Jesuit college and seminary, monastery and nunnery, and all the east coast is so crowded with chapels that sometimes one is able to count half a dozen at a time. Some of them are useful as beacons. The male inhabitants in general are not very pleased with the overabundant influence of the priests, but here as everywhere the weaker sex encourages it. The only newspaper, La Cruz del Sur, is conducted by the priests. It appears once a week, and is free from all news. The only number I read contained a biography of the Pope and a statistical account of Catholicism's conquest of the world. Amongst others, Sweden was rapidly returning to the only saving faith, according to this authority. The cathedral is situated at the plaza, where are found other more noteworthy edifices, the house of the intendant, governor of the province, the bishop's house, the fire brigade, and the Jesuit college. With its broken and to some extent very original sculptures, its plantations full of weeds and its paths overgrown, the plaza gives the impression of decay. Ancud has seen its best days. Those were when the devastation of the forest started, many years ago. Beautiful timber, Alirce and cypress, Fitzroy Patagonia and Libocedrus tetragona, 2 conifers, laurel, Laurelia aromatica, and luma, Myrtus luma, was plentiful all round in the forest. The transport cost scarcely anything, ships came and went, the town prospered, there were wealthy men. This state of things did not last long. The coastal regions easy of access became exhausted, and it cost too much to draw profit from the interior, as means of communication were difficult. There is only one road worthy of the name, leading from Ancud to Castro, but it does not touch the central parts covered by impenetrable forests down to the west coast, where harbors are completely lacking and where the surf seldom permits a landing. Culture keeps to the north and east coasts, where the outlying islands act as a shelter and good harbors are frequent. Before giving an account of our travels in these parts, I wish to say some words by way of a brief description of the Chilote and his life. We made his acquaintance long before that of his country, because several of the sailors on board the government steamers in Punta Arenas were Chilotes. We had learned to know the small plump men as enterprising, intelligent, and light-hearted. It is not uncommon to hear Chileans from the mainland speak with disrespect of the Chilotes, whom they accuse of stupidity and indolence, lethargy, and love of dirtiness. Many hardly consider them as fellow creatures. In any case, they consider them inferior to themselves. And the Chilotes answer by not wanting to be styled Chilenos. They are Chilotes, and nothing more. I dare say it is quite as good. You must not judge them till you know the conditions under which they live. Chiloé is covered by impenetrable primeval forests and soaked by deluges of rains. The annual rainfall amounts to from 78 to 100 inches or even more. Cultivation has not been able to clear more than a narrow strip along the coast. The forest almost refuses to burn, and how cut it down and get it away when there are no roads? To make a road is much too laborious an enterprise for the private individual, and once made it demands continual expenditure, or at once it is changed into a bottomless ditch of tough clay. And I believe the Chilote has one big fault: he has little ambition. If he has his bit of shore, where some wheat and his principal food, potatoes, grow, some small horses, cows, and sheep, then he is contented. More than that, he is a rich man. What is barely enough to maintain life upon he is able to gain with a minimum of work. The sea gives him plenty. At low tide he gathers shellfish and sea urchins, cochayuyo, durvalea, a gigantic brown kelp, and luce, ulva, a green alga. The oyster banks provide a delicious dish, and there is any amount of fish. It is not at all surprising that he has little interest for agriculture. Modern methods are unknown to him. His plow is of pre-Columbian type. He boils his potatoes or roasts them, makes his soup of mutton or fowl, brews chicha from his small apples, and lives happy in the house of his ancestors. The roof is thatched and without a vent hole for smoke, there is an earthen floor, and the windows often have no panes. Besides the members of the family, pigs are found within, and furniture is very scarce. Sometimes there is a separate cookhouse of almost the shape of a round tent. Should the Chilote become ambitious or eager to save money, he seldom clears more ground to enlarge his estate, but leaves one element, the forest, and takes to the next, the sea. He is a born sailor. From childhood he has gone with his father in an open boat, made long journeys to look for fur seals or valuable timber, especially Alirce. He loves the sea, he travels all over the world, but is usually driven back to the old place, for his heart clings to the forest, the potatoes, and oysters of the big island of Chiloé. It may be true that his character shows more than one defect, that he is too little ambitious, and often lives for the day without any higher aspirations. Nevertheless, a stranger who comes to his house is attracted by his kindly hospitality and childish mind, and, if he learns to know him in his proper element, cannot help admiring him. Who can match him in living in the dismal forest for weeks or months, working hard, and getting up as soaked with rain as he goes to sleep, walking mile after mile over the most terrible ground, finding a foothold on slippery logs with a heavy load, cutting his way through the bamboo thickets, or navigating the rapid, dangerous rivers? And all without other provisions than some charqui, dried meat, and harina tostada, coarse, roasted oatmeal. The first days of our stay we made short excursions round Ancud and to the Liqui Peninsula, in order to get acquainted with the natural features, which were in many respects new to us. I shall not trouble the reader with a detailed account of them, merely giving a brief description of a ride to the west coast, the only time we saw the open ocean here. One can hardly speak of a road, one simply follows the shore from the town, if possible at low tide. At high tide one has to grope one's way in the water for some stretches, where glass smooth rocks and hidden stones give horse and rider enough to think of. In one place progress is impossible. We strike on and follow a real road, winding across a steep hill down to the water again. From the top we had a splendid view over the bay, and forgot for one moment the miserable state of the road. It looks like a system of parallel ditches, where the mud reaches to the horse's knees. The furrows are so narrow that now and then he has to plant a hoof on the slippery wall to keep his balance, and if he tries to walk on the ridge between them he slides down every second minute, bespattering you all over with dirt. We were glad to leave the hill behind, and galloped along the beach, where the rattling gravel flew whirling about the horse's hoofs. A dull rush sang in our ears, the Pacific Ocean thundered towards us, rolling in over sandbanks and rocks. Snow-white guttered the sand beach, one wave after the other rolled in, was broken into foam, and died at our feet. It was Sunday and fine weather, many people were out for a walk, and various figures looked into the little inn where we sat waiting for our dinner. The landlord, a young and very good-looking fellow, spoke Spanish with a French accent. His French wife promised to do her best. She could always offer us oysters, bread and butter, and a glass of Chilean wine. By mere chance we heard that their name was Dreyfus, and soon got to know that the husband's father, who lives in Ankit, was a cousin of the famous ex-prisoner of Devil's Island. Another of our fresh acquaintances, who sat at dinner with us, told us that his business was to hunt whale in the old-fashioned manner, only using rowing boats and hand harpoons. One does not very often find that method in use in this age of whaling steamers and shell cannons. But if there was traffic on the roads, the bay, generally crowded with oyster fishers, was the more empty. The oysters are small, but very delicious, and for 10 pesos you get a good bagful. Every month millions of them are exported to Valparaiso. On arrival there they are not so good, but certainly much more expensive. When I told a Chilote how much we pay for oysters in Sweden he shook his head, laughed, and put on a very doubtful air. We returned by moonlight, it was low tide, and without any obstacle we could gallop along over the wet, glistening beach, and were soon back in our modest quarters. It is a laborious matter to penetrate into the virgin interior of Chiloé. As we were anxious to see the primeval forest we were glad to accept an invitation to visit a settlement on Rio Pudeto. The owner was to take us there on his steam launch. The day fixed for the excursion came with fine weather. Opposite Chiloé, on the other side of the Gulf of Corcovado, the coast lay absolutely clear, presenting one of the most beautiful pictures I ever beheld. High above the dark belt of forest the long row of giant volcanoes, Osorno, Calbuco, Huequi, Yate, Minchamahuita, raise their snow-clad crowns. The landscape round the mouth of Pudeto is also worthy of attention. The entrance is about half a mile wide, the shores are muddy, and large herds of flamingos walk solemnly round poking with their beaks after food. When we approach they take to flight altogether, sail away like a pink cloud, and alight again with flapping wings, which flash black and crimson. The tides reach far up the river several miles inland, and at the entrance there is a current of some knots. It was with a favoring tide and at the speed of a racer that we approached the low wooden bridge across the broad water. The space between the pillars is small, and without a warning our noble craft was thrown against one of them, the gunwale got stove in, and there we lay as though nailed to the pier. There was no choice but to wait with patience till the current should turn. However, it is not so easy to be patient when one is half starved, and we had slipped away without any breakfast and carried no provisions. Not until the afternoon did we manage to get off, and steamed peacefully up the river, now a narrow channel of open water, winding between wide-stretching banks of reeds. In the twilight all details were soon obliterated, the sky glowed with the most beautiful colors, and a white fog settled down over the yellow swamps. It was pitch dark when at last we groped our way to the half-built house, where a party of friendly grinning Chilotes took us in. Finally, at 9 o'clock dinner was ready, but it consisted almost exclusively of potatoes. Never before in my life did I eat so much of this wholesome root. Chiloé and potatoes, these two ideas are indissolubly linked together in my mind. It is one of the native countries of Solanum tuberosum, and perhaps it is still possible to find wild specimens in the coast region. Large quantities are exported, and I dare say more than 100 different varieties are cultivated on the island, each with a different name. In a dark closet Hallie and I got a bed each, but in spite of being tired we did not sleep much, for our bedfellows were far too numerous and too lively. The next day we went into the forest. It was of the agreeable variety that one finds on sandy and comparatively dry soil. It was the middle of winter, but everything was fresh and green, nothing reminded us of death or rest, even flowers were to be seen. High above us the heads of the trees closed over, and a dull, half-mysterious light filtered through the dense foliage. What a difference between this forest and the one in the Patagonian channels. Variety instead of monotony. Trees of very large dimensions and of many kinds hitherto unknown to me filling the air with strong aromatic scent. Ferns of all sizes and shapes clothe the trunks. A large Rhodostachys bicolor, Bromeliaceae, sits high up on the branches, and thick-stemmed creepers climb towards the sky, where bright-colored bunches of flowers peep out of green clusters. In the brushwood below several old friends reappear, but also new ones, Berberis darwini and other armed enemies of the explorer. Large miniature forests of bamboo, Chusquea colihue, with yellowish-green, polished stems. Out in the open we find the quilla, Chusquea quilla, tough, rough, and prickly, but for all its disagreeable characteristics an important winter food for cattle. All was silent but for the song of some smaller birds. In vain we hoped that the pretty little pudu, the deer of Chiloé, would turn up. In old times guanaco and humo are said to have lived here, but they must have disappeared long ago. We returned overland to Ancud, following the highway from Castro. The ill-famed weather was still nice, and round the dirty huts children and a motley company of animals swarmed. Never a border, a flower in the window or a curtain, nowhere an effort at making the home comfortable. The Chilote does not seem to have any appreciation of things of that sort. The nearer we came to the town the more people we met on the road. Bullock carts of the characteristic type, with wheels of one solid wooden block and a wooden shaft, toil their way slowly through the stiff clay. Loaded with all sorts of parcels, an old woman comes riding on a small, shaggy horse. A white-bearded old fellow hobbles barefoot in the mud, tenderly embracing a bottle recently acquired in the town. On our arrival we got important news. The government steamer Valdivia was in. And smeared with clay high up on my thighs, and equipped in all the elegance characteristic of the tramp, I had to receive a visit from the commander, who presented himself to put the steamer at our disposal. In order to survey a larger stretch round the Corcovado Gulf, we had asked the government to help us. With the answer from Valparaiso in my hand I turned to Commodore K. Maldonado, well known for geographical explorations of the Chilean coasts. He was stationed in Puerto Montt, and had 2 steamers there for nautical surveying purposes. He answered immediately by sending us the Valdivia. The next morning, July 18th, we steered out of the bay, by the way, a rather bad harbor, past the whirlpools of Canal Chacao, and thence followed the west coast, where civilization has set its stamp everywhere. On the evening of the following day we arrived at Castro, and there we found the Toro before us. That was good luck, our first task being to find that steamer and go aboard her, because the Valdivia was not fit for the rather dangerous waters we were to visit. Our new steamer wanted a day to coal and provision, which gave us a good opportunity to have a look at the town, a title with which the place is honored. Castro is, however, a historic place. Founded in 1567, it remained the capital of Chiloé until 1768, and has a big church and a convent to remind it of past, glorious days. Otherwise it makes a miserable impression, with its ruinous houses and wretched streets, where the wayfarer finds many dangerous pitfalls. I must recommend one of the night cafes. We entered on an earthen floor, sat down on a filthy bench by the traditional fire pan, and a roughly used Chilote woman with a baby at the breast served us with some very doubtful, poisonous mixtures. Soon a rotund old woman came in, took a glass with us, and put life into the conversation. They knew, of course, who we were. Gossip is not at all lacking in Castro. Under the command of Captain J.E. Marino, the Toro left Castro on July 21st, and after a short visit to Quellon we arrived at San Pedro Island, at the southeastern corner of Chiloé. This place is not inhabited, but we found some Chilotes there busy cutting down big trees. 2 of them came on board in the evening. The weather had been tolerably good, but showed signs of getting bad, and probably we should have stopped where we were, waiting till it had settled again, if the 2 Chilotes had not prophesied a fine day for our visit to the Isle of Wafo, far away out in the open sea. It blew hard north when we left the cove and the rain poured down. Enormous waves rose high above the little steamer, which is smaller even than the Hummel. The wind increased, a fog came on, and after a short consultation we resolved to seek shelter in the only place available, the Huapiquilan Islands. Not one of the officers had ever visited these remote islands, and I dare say the occasion to make their acquaintance was not very well chosen, had there been any choice. Without adventure we managed to get in between them, and found the necessary shelter from the storm, that now raged with full force. The next morning we still had a gale of wind, but not so bad as the day before, and we resolved to try to reach Wafo. Instantly a heavy sea met us, and as soon as we lost the shelter of land we got as much as we could stand. It was a grand sight. We were half drowned in floods of water, and the port lifeboat was very nearly carried away by a tremendous wave. We had hard work to stand upright on deck, clinging to the irons of the bridge. The gunwales were under water all the time. A lot of things on deck broke loose and danced round with the eddying waters. When we reached Samuel Cove, the only, and hardly useful, berth on the island, the wind had increased still more. Later we were told that the anemometer on the lighthouse had indicated 114 feet per sec. It was high time for us to get shelter, but do not think that for this reason we got a calm night. The small, open bay is full of shoals, and there is no room to swing, but with 2 anchors down and a thick hawser round some big trees on the shore we slept tolerably well in spite of the considerable motion. Next day the storm continued, and we landed in the surf at the mouth of a stream, along which we wanted to penetrate into the virgin forest. Not very often have I seen such luxuriance in a temperate climate. Mosses appeared in incredible quantities, the ferns had stems of a man's height, bamboo surrounded us in all directions. The foliage glittered with moisture, the moss carpet was like a swamp, and we soon became drenched to the skin. Showers of rain or hail completed the situation. On board the crew had been collecting sea urchins, and at dinner we made a feast off these delicacies, which are highly appreciated in Chile. In the alimentary canal of the sea urchin a rather large parasitic crustacean often takes up its quarters, thus leading a most comfortable life. This animal is considered extremely delicious, and is eaten alive and kicking. I ate one once, but never again. It had a horrible taste, and besides was really unpleasant to have to do with, being about 1.5 inches broad. The following day the weather had settled somewhat. We resolved to try the lighthouse, which is situated high up on a precipitous cliff. We brought provisions in the mail, which were landed in a nasty surf. Outside the sea was still very heavy, and we anchored in a shallow bay, where the motion would allow us to have our luncheon. From the ship we got sight of some white spots moving along the beach. They were wild dogs of a kind that has lived on this island for centuries. They are about the size of a setter, have long hair, and are dirty white in color. They are very shy, probably they live on birds and their eggs, but are said also to eat shellfish. It was already 3 o'clock before we could weigh again in order to go back to Huapiculan. The sky in the southwest looked threatening, but we hoped to get out, in spite of the big sea reducing our speed considerably. But before we had time to think the gale came rushing on, a raging wind with squalls of hail, wrapping us in an impenetrable haze. It was getting dark, the sky was black as soot, and with forced speed, as much as the boiler could stand, we made for the harbor. Then came a squall heavier than the rest. The Toro trembled under the frightful blow. Giant hailstones whipped our face and made it hardly possible to keep our eyes open. Darkness hid everything. Some thrilling seconds ensued. We were amidst the reefs, but the fog lifted for a moment, giving us time enough to rush through the narrow gap, the entrance to the berth. We were not 5 minutes too soon. Night had overtaken us. Between sunken rocks, over which the sea broke into pillars of foam, we headed for San Pedro again on July 27th. I intended to make an excursion in the forest, and I made the captain and a young lieutenant come with me, promising them an experience that might prove new to them. I myself was prepared for whatever should come, for Darwin in his journals has erected an epitaph over San Pedro Forest which is not likely to be misunderstood. We had to climb a very steep slope. The fallen trees do not decay very rapidly, but form immense barricades, especially round the numerous streams. As usual they are enveloped in a soaked moss carpet, and mosses also hang down in long festoons from the branches and wash your face. We seldom put our feet on the ground, but climbed like monkeys from one trunk to the next, balancing over the abyss. Deep down, as deep as 20 feet below, we caught sight of a muddy, reddish clay, with which we now and then had to make closer acquaintance as a log suddenly broke and we were sent down headlong, only to gain the lofty path once more by creeping and crawling on hands and knees. A hatchet was kept going cutting the innumerable creepers which caught arms and legs, and our perseverance was put to a protracted test. Frequent squalls enlivened our adventures. The poor lieutenant had to be left behind quite exhausted. We rested a few minutes and found new strength in some cold meat and a piece of bread, and then took up the battle again. After a strenuous climb on our hands and knees we gained a ridge, whence I had hoped to get a good view of the island, but alas! There was another valley in front of us, and behind it the next ridge. My comrades were not very anxious to go any further, but as I insisted on it, they followed. The valley swallowed us up, and we reached the other side, and came out of the high forest and into a new kind of vegetation, that is called by the natives tepul, a tremendous hedge. Every time we came to a clear space we had to stop to breathe. On the top of this ridge were extensive swamps with scattered cypresses, Libocedrus tetragona. With the Tepualia stipularis. We had gained a height of 1,600 feet, more or less. Snow was falling thickly, and it was late enough to make us turn back. Half unrecognizable under the mud, with scratched faces and hands and our clothes torn to rags, we reached the beach once more. The captain had hardly any trousers left, but certainly a naval officer's uniform was not made for the forest of San Pedro. In order to cross the gulf, we first had to visit Quellen to Cole. There is a sawmill there, and the company's steamer was in. We found the captain to be a Swede, Mr. T. Landgren, who had also camped with Captain Marino on one of the Chilean men of war. He was one of the Swedes sent out at the request of the Chilean government to serve as pilotos in the navy, which he had left to enter into private service. He was not a little astonished to meet countrymen here, and we rightly celebrated the occasion with a big dinner on board his vessel. As Halley wanted to visit Quellen for geological investigations, we also spent one day at that place. The small idyllic village, once called the end of Christianity, has a large wooden church and a square plaza, where fat pigs had made themselves comfortable in the green grass. The last day of July came bright and frosty, the air was clear, and we crossed the gulf, steaming for Mount Corcovado, El Famoso, as this old volcano is sometimes styled. Few summits are more imposing than this one, with its precipitous peak shining like snow-white enamel against the blue background. We wanted to land at the foot, but found this easier said than done. The beach falls off at a rather sharp angle and the surf is strong enough to play with the coarse shingle. In our little yawl we could not venture to approach. Fortunately, a small river flows out close by, and as the sea did not break on the barrier at its mouth, we went in with a rush on a wave and stepped on shore. The Toro looked for an anchorage here, but did not find any, and we had to steam up to the entrance of the large Yelcho River, where there is good shelter behind an island. The place was inhabited, a company for a combined sawmill industry and colonization enterprise having its headquarters there. At the river some years ago a Chilean surveying party had its station, and a road was said to follow the shore inland. Of course we wanted to make use of this, and started early the next day in the settled belief of being able to walk on a road. After a while we found it, broad enough for a bullock cart, but the joy did not last long. A few hundred yards and the noble highway dwindled suddenly into a narrow path, from which only the worst obstacles had been removed. The forest is so swampy that one cannot walk there during the rainy season, and therefore the road is plastered with logs sometimes right across, when you jump from one to the next, sometimes longitudinally, and then you have to balance. Generally there is only one log. Some places were quite dreadful, the logs were gone, and we sank down knee-deep at once. Others were transformed into bottomless lagoons where we had to stop to pick our way. But as the day passed we grew more skillful in keeping our balance than we had ever been in our lives before. At last the path disappeared in a bamboo thicket. Probably nobody had been here for many years. We crawled through, found the path again, and went down to the river, which is one of the largest in West Patagonia. We returned in the twilight with a good lot of botanical collections, took the last barricade, and came down to the colony. From Yelcho we went to the beautiful Renihu Fjord, and thence returned to Castro, where my comrades stopped in order to ride to Ankud. Forced by circumstances, I returned there without delay, and dispatched the Toro. Few of our excursions have left such agreeable memories as this one with the naval officers, who were always ready to render every service possible. We took farewell of them as of old friends, soon found but never forgotten. On August 10th we went on board the Vestfold, passing Ankud on the way to Valparaiso. Chapter 8. In the heart of Chile. During the following weeks we got an opportunity of seeing quite new features of Chile. Hitherto we had almost exclusively traveled in parts where civilization had not reached or was quite new, the big island of Chiloé excepted. But the difference between the poor places there and the towns we now visited was certainly enormous. The more important towns are generally situated on the coast or very near it, and sometimes so close that only a few hours' journey by steamer separates them. Most of them do not offer much of interest to a traveling European. They do not afford any historical memories or examples of art and architecture, and they are not the right places if one wishes to see Chilean customs. On board the Vestfold we passed several towns. Already elsewhere I have mentioned that we visited Valdivia, with its port, Corral. The last named little town has a very picturesque situation, and can boast of some ruins of the Spanish fortress. Industry is beginning to flourish. A Norwegian whaling company has a station there, and a French syndicate was just building large electric furnaces to melt down the Chilean iron ores. Valdivia, situated at some distance from the coast, on the Chiloé River, is a German town. Everywhere you met German faces, German signboards and placards alongside the Spanish. There is a large German school, a church and various vereine, large shoe factories, and, of course, breweries. It gives an impression of a rapidly increasing community. After the Great Fire last year, a large part of the town will be rebuilt on a much grander scale than before. But Valdivia is especially famous for its streets. Situated in one of the rainiest parts of Chile, surrounded by luxuriant forests, the town literally drips with moisture, and the streets have hardly passed the state of the forest soil. One can only cross at certain places, where wooden causeways are laid, and we saw the horses wade up to their bellies in the mud, the wheels of the carts almost disappearing. In Coronel our expedition divided again. Halley was kindly taken care of by the Swedish vice-consul, Mr. G. Granfield, and during the following weeks dedicated himself to a geological survey of the interesting coal mines in the province of Arauco. He made his headquarters in Coronel, Lota, and Lebu, and obtained very valuable results. Certainly all of us took the chance of visiting the famous park in Lota. This, as well as a part of the town itself and the coal mines, are the property of the family Cousiño. Unfortunately, the park is not as well kept as it used to be, and is also spoiled by a palace with 4 facades in 4 different styles, and by dozens of spurious statues of a very suspiciously German origin. From Lota, Quenzel and I went to Concepcion, a larger town of pure European stamp, and from there by electric tramway to its port, Talcahuano, the naval port of Chile, and the only good harbor north of Chiloé. There we went on board the Vestfold once more. On August 14, Valparaiso spread out over the narrow beach, and, climbing high up on the many hills behind, lay before us, and between the hundreds of steamers and sailing vessels we were conducted to an anchorage. The principal reason for our visit here was that we intended to make an excursion to the Juan Fernandez Islands, which we accomplished between August 20th and 31. We had prepared it long before, and Captain Lowenborg pleaded our case so well that Admiral Montt put at our disposal the large and comfortable transport vessel the Casma. Before the trip was undertaken, and also after our return, we found ample time to see both Valparaiso and Santiago, with their scientific institutes, and also to make a couple of longer excursions. In 1906, the year of the Great Earthquake, Valparaiso was on everyone's tongue. 2 years had elapsed since that tremendous catastrophe, but numerous traces were still left, especially as the authorities have seized the opportunity partly to replan the town, which somewhat delayed the rebuilding of waste streets. Everywhere, even in the blocks that had suffered but little, one could discover filled-up cracks in the walls. In Valparaiso several Swedes live, but only in Santiago could one speak of a real Swedish colony. It counts some very prominent members. I need only mention a couple of the most able officers in the army, Colonel Ekdahl and Lieutenant Colonel Schonmeier, or the director of gymnastics, Mr. J. Billing, late lieutenant in the Swedish army. The reception given to us by our countrymen in Santiago will always remain one of the most agreeable memories of our journey. Santiago is famous for its situation at the foot of the Andes. I dare say there is nothing in the world like its racecourse, with snowy peaks and crests many thousand feet high as decoration. I am afraid, however, that the fine view does not account for the enormous number of people there. Nature in central Chile is truly different from all we had seen before of that country. The climate is warm and dry, even on the coast. Only in the valleys of the coast Cordillera is there forest, formed by a number of fine trees, most of which I had not met with before. On the plateaus and ridges the reddish soil shines through, and with its peculiar plants, amongst them the large pillar cactus, Sirius, it gives the impression of a semi-desert. One ought to see, as we did, these parts in springtime, when beautiful lilies, orchids, and sea adorn the earth. With the approach of summer they go to sleep. Between Valparaiso and Santiago one passes one of the sources of wealth in Chile, the Central Valley between the 2 mountain ranges, vast prairies, thousands of cattle and large vineyards everywhere. Through the kindness of the Transandino Railway Company we visited the much spoken of tunnel joining Chile and Argentina, and at the same time a grand mountain district. The railway starts from the small town Los Andes. Here we have a typical Chilean country town, with low white, pink, or light blue buildings of one story, mostly not very well kept, long brown earthen walls, broken and picturesque. How well the flowering peach trees stand out against the dark clay. The sun scorches, there are clouds of thick brown dust over the streets, covering the willows and their opening buds, marring the finery of the horsemen. It is Dia de Fiesta, the birthday of the Holy Virgin. Dark-faced Don Juans, with trappings and enormous spurs of silver, embroidered leggings and many-colored, homespun poncho, gallop towards the garlanded triumphal arches forming a walk up to the church. Evening steals upon Los Andes, life dozes off, only now and then the faint notes of a guitar reach us. The sun sinks, the mountains glow in the last beams, then the outlines fade away, snow patches and bare rock melt together into a blue haze and darken to deep night. The moon rises, drowning the peach blossom in floods of silver, everything dusty and ugly disappears in the soft luster. But a strenuous day is in store for us, and we are forced regretfully to go to sleep. The train winds up the valley of Aconcagua, lined with gay groves, adorned by many flowers. The river sinks deeper and deeper, the air grows thin, pure, and cool. The rack commences, higher and higher we rise. In Juncal our special train was stopped. The line was ready for another 9.5 miles, but as work was going on in 2 of the 13 tunnels on this stretch we had to mount the mules kept in readiness for us. Besides the guide, Mr. Curtis, whom the company had sent with us, we got an additional member for our party, the police sergeant in Juncal. The road was not considered safe just then, and the police wanted to be at hand in case anything should happen. We rose in an eternal zigzag line. In all directions we enjoyed grand scenery, but nature was still in the grip of winter. At some distance we passed Laguna del Inca, one of the most beautiful mountain lakes I ever saw, and late in the evening we arrived at the entrance of the tunnel, Caracoles, where we were invited to dinner by the English engineer. We had a merry time, and from the gramophone horn Melba and Crusoe competed for our favor. Each of us got on a pair of rubber boots and had a lamp to carry, and we splashed into the tunnel, where work was going on day and night, and where we got an idea of how a tunnel is made. The total length, 19 miles, was evidently not very considerable, but the loose quality of the rock made work very difficult. At the time of our visit a thick wall still separated the 2 republics. Last year, however, the first train passed under the enormous mass of the Andes. We were glad to get out into the cold night air once more, and sit down and enjoy some whiskey and a pipe of tobacco. Life among the laborers and the scum of mankind seeking its way across the Uspallata Pass is rather wild. A few weeks before our arrival 11 men left Caracoles to cross to the Argentine side. They never got there. They appeared, however, when the snow melted, for every spring, when the road across is put in order, the bodies of those who have disappeared during the winter are found, frozen to ice, partly robbed of their clothes, sometimes with the pockets turned inside out, murdered, robbed, and simply left. The soil of that pass is literally soaked with the blood of the victims of assassins and highwaymen. When traffic is open it is no risk for the railway passengers to cross. More than 30 feet of snow have been recorded near the pass, and during the winter the railway has not hitherto been used. Traffic had not begun, the road lay partly under snow and ice, but with a guide as excellent as ours we did not hesitate to cross. We had a splendid morning on September 10th. The ground was frozen hard, the ice jingled like broken glass under the hoofs of our mules. With uncommon agility they passed the most dangerous places, of which there was no lack. The sergeant made a halt at a small stone house he wanted to inspect, took his carbine with the air of an official, and entered, but was soon back, there being no traces of the rascals he was looking for. The thin air made us feel a slight pressure across the temples, but otherwise it did not affect us. We reached the pass, La Cumbre, on a height of 13,000 feet, thus having a good deal of our globe under our feet. Some few steps from us is the gigantic statue of Christ, erected as a monument to the eternal peace between the 2 republics, but not a living soul, not a blade of grass, only rock and snow. With legs stiff, so that the loose sand whirled round them, our mules slide down the most westerly slopes of Argentina, and we reached Las Cuevas, the entrance to the tunnel on the Argentine side. From there we continued our ride and passed the valley where Aconcagua, hitherto regarded as the highest mountain in America, makes the background. Huascaran is now said to compete for the honor, but as the proofs are not sufficient we took off our caps and bowed to his alpine majesty. In Baño del Inca, where one has to cross the famous natural bridge, we tried the sulfur baths. No doubt we were the very first visitors that year. We turned round and slept in Las Cuevas, and the next morning Mr. Curtis and I crossed to Chile again, Quetzal waiting till the next day. Our journey from Caracoles to Los Andes was rather original. With fine disdain for the train, we used a trolley. Down we went, sometimes at a breakneck speed, but the intense feeling of freedom made us forget the risk. The line for long stretches runs on narrow shelves, cut in the steep mountain sides. Derailment would mean instantaneous death. Further down we were very nearly run over by a train, and just had time to throw ourselves and the trolley off the rail. Situations rapidly change in this world. In the morning we experienced a temperature of several degrees below freezing point on the high crests of the desolate Cordillera. At night that same day we were enjoying the tepid air between the park trees in a big city. From another excursion to the coast at Zapalar, north of Valparaiso, I returned just in time to take part in the Great National Feast, from September 18th to 20, the anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, 1810. It is a real people's feast, celebrated with the same enthusiasm by all classes of society. Aristocracy has its processions, te deum, races, and military parades. The people dance la cueca and drink chicha in the parks all night long. I could not deny that the air itself was really filled with a feeling of festivity, the whole country being decorated with banners of all colors, garlands, and triumphal arches, while on the railway the engines were adorned with green leaves, flowers, and flags, and everywhere were heard patriotic speeches and the playing of bands. And for 3 whole days no one who is not forced to does any work. When Halley had finished his work he joined us in Santiago, and, using the Great Central Railway, running longitudinally through the Valle Central, we went to Valdivia once more. In Corral we took a passenger steamer. It was the Tino, with a Swede, Mr. Backlund, as captain, another late piloto, who had left the Navy after some years' service. Again we visited Ancud, said goodbye to all our friends there, took on board our equipment, and crossed the Gulf to Puerto Montt, where we were now going to prepare the expedition overland through the whole of Patagonia. Chapter 9. Robinson Crusoe's Island. Far out in the Pacific Ocean, 360 nautical miles west of Valparaiso, lies a small island, called Juan Fernandez, or Masadiera, i.e., nearer land. Another 96 miles further out we find a second rocky islet, bearing the name of Masafuera, equals further away, and at the west end of Masadiera a much smaller islet, Santa Clara, rises out of the breakers. These 3 islands together form the Juan Fernandez group. From the first moment I got to know anything about the nature and plant life of this highly remarkable place and saw a photograph of Masadiera, I had longed to go there, without any hope whatever of getting nearer to it than dreaming of that scientist's paradise. When, in 1907, I left Sweden on my second long journey I had not the slightest idea that 1 year later I should in fact land on Juan Fernandez. Through the valuable assistance of the Chilean authorities we had been able to save much time, new schemes arose, and the idea of being able to realize my dream of bygone days made my heart beat with expectation. Negotiations were opened, with the result already mentioned above. The Casma was a good vessel of 4,000 tons and very spacious, saloons and cabins were large and comfortable. Her commander was Captain F. Dublé, of the Chilean Navy. We shall never forget his kindness and the courtesy of his officers. At daybreak on August 22 a sailor came into my cabin to announce that Masadiera had been sighted. We came on the bridge in haste, anxious to behold the wonderland. At a distance it looked like any other wild, storm-beaten, rocky island, and I cannot say that this impression weakened as we approached. The sky-high peaks, the valleys with their precipitous slopes, the breakers rolling in on broken cliffs, everything gave an almost repulsive impression of desolation. However, it soon greatly modified as we came into the open harbor, Cumberland Bay, where bright green patches showed up on the slopes interspersed with patches of the naked red soil, where dark forests stretched high up in the valleys and over the ridges, and where a cluster of small wooden huts, here and there with a piece of garden, showed that here also the human race had found means of subsistence, perhaps of happiness. We set our foot on the shore of a legendary island. Dear reader, do you remember how the wonderful fortunes and adventures of Robinson Crusoe interested you, when you were a small boy or girl and went to the infant school? Did you not dream that it rained drops, large as pigeons' eggs, or that you discovered on the sandy seashore those footprints making your blood curdle with terror? How the tale of Robinson excited the imagination at the same time that it taught us so many useful things. Perhaps many of us would feel disappointment when landed on Robinson's Island. Where is the tropical luxuriance? Where are the parrots, monkeys, and tortoises? Where the descendants of Friday's people? Well, certainly Defoe let fancy run away with him. He has adorned his island with all the richness of the tropics, and makes his hero land there under the most dramatic circumstances. But I myself did not think of the difference between truth and fiction. The former seemed to me wonderful enough, and I was seized by a feeling of pure joy when I thought that I was really here, walking about on that soil, and able to live through the favorite book of early childhood again. Masadiera is a steep, rocky island, with an area of only 38 square miles. When you are down at the harbor, the chances for excursions seem rather limited, for the slopes rise high and steep all round. In reality, one stands on the bottom of an old volcano, surrounded by its semicircular wall, out of which some parts, such as the precipitous Pico Central and the Yunque, certainly deserving its name, the Anvil, rise more distinctly. The last one, with a height of 3,040 feet, is the highest summit. Thanks to some narrow paths, running in zigzag, it is possible to get out of the crater and cross the ridges, and thus reach the bays on both sides. Many slopes, however, are not possible to climb, and the name of one of the crests, Salsapuedes, which means, try to get out if you can, reminds one of this. The spot to which the stranger first makes his way is Portezuelo de Villagra, a sharp gap in the southern ridge, where Robinson is said to have climbed to look out over the ocean. Following the dirty roads between the houses, we ascend slowly till we come to the many-colored, steep slopes of volcanic tufas, and the path disappears in a thicket of maquis. The maquis, Aristotelia, has been imported from the continent in late years, and this disagreeable tree is now spreading rapidly, threatening the original vegetation with annihilation. However, it does not reach very far, and we soon got rid of it. We now start to climb the steep mountain wall, where the path winds along in a very sharp zigzag. One can sometimes jump down directly into one path from the next above it. It is time to have a look at the peculiar natural features around us. From a botanical point of view, Juan Fernandez is one of the world's most famous places. It is often the case that islands lying far away from the great continents exhibit a marvelous animal and plant life, containing genera and species not found elsewhere, endemic, as they are called. In this respect, Juan Fernandez is perhaps only surpassed by the Sandwich Islands. About 65% of the total number of vascular plants, phanerogams and ferns, are confined to that small group of isles. It is as if one had been carried back to past geological periods, as if one walked about in a living museum, crowded with rare specimens. So many wonderful plants are brought together here on a small area that one must touch them to realize that one does not dream. Especially worthy of attention are the small, sparingly branched trees with long, thin, more or less erect naked branches crowned by a rosette of large, thin leaves. For the most part they are members of the composite order, but other orders also have representatives. It is besides a remarkable fact that this type of organization is found also on other oceanic islands, the Canary Isles, for instance. The flora is without doubt very old, of a tertiary origin or older, and must have come from the South American continent, but for several reasons disappeared to a great extent on the mainland. The Ice Age cannot have had any influence of importance on Juan Fernandez. In the narrow gorges, quebradas, that we pass there is a dense and impenetrable primeval forest. It looks black-green, thanks to the dark foliage of the endemic myrtle tree, which we found in bud and flower in spite of the early date of our visit. Above the other trees rises the masterpiece of creation, La Chanta, the endemic palm, Juania australis. It is impossible not to caress the smooth green stem as one tries to get a sight of its majestic head of large pinnate leaves. Glorious it is, a true princeps of the vegetable kingdom, noble from top to root. Unfortunately, it is only too popular. It is persecuted with saw and hatchet. Every ship brings away trunks and young plants, and it has already been exterminated from all places easy of access. The top is used as cabbage, the trunk is carved into beautiful walking sticks, and the young plants are put in the gardens on the coast. In spite of the fact that we have sufficient proofs that the chanta cannot grow on the mainland. In 1895, Professor Joao, of Santiago, the most prominent specialist in the flora, proposed to the authorities to protect the tree in question, and I was told that there exists a law on the subject. However, nobody seems to take any notice of such a trifle. Creeping or winding plants are hardly met with the exception of a few ferns. Arborous ferns, together with chanta and sandalwood, have made the islands well known to non-scientists also. The fern flora is really very rich. There are all types of growth, from the mighty fern trees, reminding one of mountain forests in the tropics, to the wonderful members of genera such as Hymenophyllum and Trichomanes, thin as tissue paper, or the creeper species adorning the trunks of the trees. The ferns also, especially the arborus, are the objects of a reckless war of extermination, and our fellow travelers on the Chasma were not better than their predecessors, though I expostulated with them on the matter every day. It hurt me to see one boat load after the other of precious plants taken on board the steamer, most of them only to be wasted. We have arrived at the Portezuelo, or Selkirk's Lookout, as this picturesque spot is sometimes called. The trees are very low, or have been replaced by strange shrubs mingled with the curious Pangea, Gunnera peltata, and forming a very entangled mass. On a vertical mountain wall is the tablet erected in honor of the true Robinson, the Scotch sailor Alexander Selkirk. The inscription runs as follows: In memory of Alexander Selkirk, mariner, a native of Largo in the county of Fife, Scotland, who lived on this island in complete solitude for 4 years and 4 months. He was landed from the Shinku Port's galley, 96 tons, 16 guns, A.D. 1704, and was taken off in the Duke, privateer, the 12th of February 1709. He died lieutenant of HMS Weymouth, A.D. 1723, aged 47 years. This tablet is erected near Selkirk's Lookout by Commodore Powell and the officers of HMS Tapes, A.D. 1868. This is the historical basis of Defoe's work. It may look somewhat meager, but one can understand that poor Selkirk had to work to preserve his life. What a mental trial, not to hear a word spoken by another, not to see a human soul for 4 years and 4 months. Thus his fate was pretty adventurous even if told without embellishment. On the other hand, he left his ship at his own request, discontented with the life on board. Besides, he might have chosen a worse place. The climate is very mild, it rains just enough, snow or frost is unknown. A few plants are edible, and the goats, which were much more numerous in Selkirk's time than they are now, provided him with fresh meat. Through a walk lined with marvelous trees and precious ferns, we pass the natural gate and are on the south side of the island. Down it goes, almost as precipitous as on the other side. We have a magnificent view of the coast and Santa Clara, where a tremendous surf roars. Soon we came out of the forest, and continued on to the barren slopes near the sea. The vegetation here is more like that of a steppe, with short grass and some heath plants. Only along the streams is there a bright green strip, a mosaic of gigantic Pangea leaves. And we bent the thick stalks at the side and drank to the health of Masadiera and Robinson and the whole world. There is only one way back, the way we had come. It was getting dark and we hurried on through showers of rain. Large drops splashed on the heads of the rosette trees. The soil emitted strong, peculiar scents. The last part of the way we slid down in the slippery clay. Above I happened to mention the sandal wood. The discovery of this kind of wood, famous since the days of Solomon, on Juan Fernandez most surely attracted notice. We have no reports of it previous to 1624, when, according to Burney, Laramite reported sandal trees in great number. According to another authority, ships used to visit the place as early as 1664 to bring the valuable wood to the coast, where it was highly appreciated. One did not think of preserving anything. 100 years later it was hardly possible to find a living tree, and in the beginning of last century it was regarded as extinct. No botanist had ever seen the leaves or flowers. Suddenly F. Filippi in Santiago got some fresh twigs brought to him in 1888. He found them to belong to the genus Santalum. The species being new, it received the name of S. fernandesianum. The general interest in the tree was increased, but nobody told where the branches came from. A living tree was still unknown. Only in 1892 did Joao get news of one. A colonist had found it in Puerto Ingalls, high up in the valley. He was the first botanist who saw this plant. It is easily understood that I was anxious to become the second. How many people had looked for other specimens? All their efforts were fruitless. As far as we knew, Joho's tree was the very last. If it were still there, the man who brought Joao to the spot still lived, and after we had explained our purely scientific interest, he promised to send his son with us. It would have been more than uncertain for us alone to look for a single tree in a valley clad with virgin forest. It is possible to climb across the ridge that separates Cumberland Bay from the English harbor, but we preferred to go there with a well-manned boat. The landing is, as in most places on the islands, performed with some risk. One must jump just at the right moment, and there has to be a good crew in the yawl, or the boat would be thrown on the rocks and capsized. Perhaps I ought to mention that the place in question only has the name of a harbor. We walked up the valley and made an ascent of the western side. The place is so steep that one is forced to grasp the trees and shrubs to get a foothold. Our guide stopped, looked round for a minute, down a few hundred yards, and we had reached our destination. The last sandal tree, absolutely the last descendant of Santalum fernandesianum. It is so queer to stand at the deathbed of a species. Probably we were the last scientists who saw it living. We look at the old tree with a religious respect, touch the stem and the firm, dark green leaves. It is not only an individual, it is a species that is dying. It cannot last very long. There is only one little branch left fresh and green, the others are dead. We cut a piece to get specimens of the peculiar red, strongly scented wood. A photo was taken, I made some observations on the place, and we said goodbye. Should I happen to go there once more, I shall not see the sandal tree. It will be dead and its body cut up into precious pieces, curiosities taken away by every stranger. In the evening we gathered in the cavern near the shore, Robinson's Grotto, as it is generally called. Maybe that Selkirk slept here a couple of nights. We know that he did not take up his permanent quarters in this place. The officers from the Casma met us here, bringing some dinner for us. How excellent it tasted in the spirit of poetry lent by Robinson's Grotto, after what in my journals is entitled, The Day of the Sandal Tree. Early in the morning of August 26th, we left Cumberland Bay, past the magnificent coast cliffs, especially noteworthy at Cape Salinas, continued to the southwestern promontory of the island, and anchored in Bahia del Padre. All this coast is more or less difficult of approach, and only in fine weather can one effect a landing. We had enjoyed several days of calm, and were pretty sure of success. One of the colonists, a Frenchman, accompanied us, bringing with him a small flat-bottomed boat. Without this a landing would not have been safe, as the water is very shallow close to the cliff, where one has to jump ashore. There is always a heavy surf. The excursion, as usual, was a miniature alpine tour. Round the coast grow fine seaweeds, and there was a rich animal life, so that the result of our work turned out very well. At nightfall we weighed anchor and made for Masafuera, finding ourselves outside Quebrada de las Casas, the only anchorage, at daybreak. Everybody on board looked forward to this visit with some excitement. The shore there is a steep slope, with large boulders and a heavy surf. Several days may pass without a landing being possible, and in any case one must be prepared to get wet. We had very good luck. The topography of Masafuera is more peculiar still than that of Masadiera. Its area is less, 34 square miles, but the height is more than double, for the summit rises to 6,500 feet. Its shape is that of a regular cone. The top is situated in the southwestern quarter, the northwestern is occupied by a plateau, 3,000 to 4,500 feet high. Towards the east a series of narrow gorges radiate like the ribs of a fan, of which Quebrada de las Casas is the largest and the only one inhabited. From our beach we had seen some houses. We did not take any notice of them, but started to climb the mountainside without delay. After having crossed several forest-clad ravines, we found ourselves on the plateau. The forest does not extend so far. Quenzel had brought his Winchester, and soon got a chance to shoot a fine buck. Wild goats were numerous here. The most common tree here is a kind of myrtle. It only grows on this island, and here takes the place of the myrtle of Masadiera. We thus found the same state of things as Darwin so splendidly described on the Galapagos Islands. The vegetation above the forest is of a very remarkable appearance, ferns and more ferns everywhere, groves of fern trees, and a carpet of smaller species. We had crossed the island and stood above the precipice. In the most breakneck places goats climb with ease, leaving man behind. Below our feet is a bank of clouds hiding the sea, only the roar from the breakers reaches us. Suddenly the veil is torn asunder by a puff of wind, and then, right below, the depth of the abyss is 4,000 feet, lies the ocean. Through the rents in the clouds we can see the white foam dancing in across a sandbank, where some wreckage shows the fate of a vessel that came too close. It is a striking sight of nature's greatness, that stirs the soul and is engraved forever in the memory. Time and place are forgotten, but the sun sinks and it becomes necessary to return to our ship. As the weather continued good the Casma could stop without risk. The place is open to all winds, and I spent the next day making excursions in two of the gorges, and Quenzel walked round the island to the west coast. The valleys are truly most remarkable, cut deep down 300 to 600 feet, and perhaps not more than 30 to 50 feet broad in the inner part, with sheer walls, sometimes nearly parallel. One walks in a natural alley. High above is a strip of the sky, and the subdued light illuminates the green carpet on the rocky walls. Here and there a tree is rooted in a cleft, but unfortunately frustrates every attempt to get a specimen. Large rosettes of light green pangay gleam on the narrow shelves. The stream, nearly filling up the bottom of the valley, chatters merrily, now and then forming a miniature waterfall. Yesterday we saw the grand, today the pretty side of Masafuera scenery. Over the desolate expanse eagles soar looking for prey. Down here the hummingbirds shoot from flower to flower, flashing with metallic splendor as they twist and turn. Calmness and peace reign, not a breath of wind stirs the elegant runners of the ferns. The next morning we were back in Cumberland Bay and made some short excursions. Unfortunately we could not stop longer, but had to go back to Valparaiso. The voyage across causes much apprehension, as one can get a heavy sea broadside on, but we did not feel much of it. On August 31st we were back again after a most interesting trip, which also gave some very good results. Among other things, I discovered some plants on the top of Masafuera well known in the south of Chile, but not to be expected out here. The Spanish navigator Juan Fernandez discovered the islands in 1563, and was their first colonist. As we have seen, it was not long before ships used to call for sandalwood, and in the 17th century Spain erected a small fortress in order to shut out the numerous English buccaneers who had their headquarters in Cumberland Bay. An earthquake in 1751 brought the fort and the small town also built there to an untimely end. But the ruins are still left. Later the island was used as a penal settlement. Near the harbor are some caverns where the prisoners lived. In our times the islands were open to colonization. On Masafuera a number of families lived, and a fishing company had stations on both islands. Sheep, cattle, and horses ran about, greatly to the damage of the vegetation. From an agricultural point of view Masafuera, and perhaps also Masafuera, is of no importance. For the development of Chile it is not of the slightest value that this strip of land should be cultivated. The fishing industry is of much greater account, especially the catching of lobsters. The giant Juan Fernandez lobster, Palanorus frontalis, sometimes from 2 to 3 feet long, does not live on the main coast of Chile, but is the more appreciated there. On the occasion of our visit it was worth 60 cents when delivered by the fishermen to the company. Their agents get 3 pesos in Valparaiso, and when it reached the table of the big restaurants it fetched 10 or even 15 pesos for big specimens. At that time 1 peso was about 8 pence. I dare say the fishing was not managed in a satisfactory way or it would have been a profitable industry. We were told that the company was about to abandon the place. Because of the quite unnecessary colonization, the future of Masafuera, as seen from a scientific point of view, looks very dark. But some time ago a still greater danger threatened Masafuera. During our visit to Chile the government made preparations to establish another penal settlement on that island. An official commission had been sent there, looked at the place, and reported it as very fit for the purpose. Among the various descriptions of labor to be imposed on the prisoners, forest cutting was mentioned. The practically worthless, scientifically irreplaceable endemic trees would be exterminated in the most brutal manner. The least one can demand, now that the prison is an accomplished fact, is that the members of that commission should spend the rest of their lives on the island. Their sin is great enough to justify this. It is evident that the preservation of natural beauty will appear a strange idea to a people like the Chileans, who first of all must think of the material development of their country, of the education of the people, and other important questions. They have not been able yet to give science the high place it occupies in the countries of the Old World. But in this case there is no time to lose. The Juan Fernandez Islands are of international interest. Their destruction means irreparable loss to the whole realm of science. The order of the day ought to be, away with the colonists. I can hardly imagine a more ideal place for a biological station than this, the queen of an ocean. And at the same time as plants and animals were being protected, a profitable fishing industry could be established, many times surpassing in value agriculture or cattle breeding. Several times I have pointed out these facts to the great public, but all in vain. I dare say a true Chilean does not know what love of nature means. Perhaps he cannot help it, he was born like that. Nevertheless, it is a pity. Since this was written I have had news from Chile that the penal settlement has not turned out very well and that the place is to be abandoned. But do not believe that the island will be left alone. There is another scheme. They are thinking of breeding sheep and cattle for the wants of the army. A most noble pasturage they will get. Is it possible? After what I have seen, anything is possible. Thank you for listening to part 2 of The Wilds of Patagonia, by Carl Skottsberg. If you enjoyed so far, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell icon so you don't miss when the next part is released. We'll continue the journey in part 3. See you there.